and welcome back. I'm Tasneem Abrahams, the founder of the Private Practice Growth Club, and welcome back to my channel. From time to time, I have guest experts because I certainly am not an expert in everything. And today I have the lovely Holly, who is a broker consultant from Capital Legacy, and she's going to be talking to us all about the horrible, dark, gloomy topic of wills. So it's lovely to have a bright, beautiful, sunny face talking about such a gloomy topic, so that hopefully it's not such an awful topic to talk about. But because it is such an awful topic, that actually makes it why it's so important that we do talk about it. So I'm not going to go
exactly.
And I'm not going to read off Holly's whole bio. I'll put that in the description box below, as well as all the links to Capital Legacy. I'll rather let Holly tell us a little bit about herself in person. So welcome, Holly, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. It's really lovely to be a part of your channel and to be a part of your show. Thank you so much for the invitation. I know that you and I met when we were doing that Women's Day with NAS Turkey, and it was so lovely to connect with you and just to be a part of, the community, just be part of your community and be part of your channel. I know that you do amazing things.
Thank you.
So just a quick bio about me. My name is Holly, and I'm a broker consultant for Capital Legacy. The company that I work with, ordinary corporate company, because I am just a normal corporate employee, but I'm selling and advising on a product that I truly believe in. And it's not a product for just one group of people. It's a product for everyone. All of those over the age of 18 with or without assets, business owners, non-business owners. It's just in order to provide, your will. And like you said earlier, a will is not something that we talk about. In South Africa, death is quite a topic that you shy away from, whereas in other cultures, for example, in Japan, it's talked about quite openly, and it just comes into our cultural dynamic. And there is a huge issue in terms of your last will and testament here in South Africa. And that's kind of what really drove me to be a part of such a growing and aspiring company to change the way that we're thinking about death and really take action while we're still alive.
That's amazing. I think the key thing that I took from you is just that taking action while we're still alive. So while thinking about death is a gloomy topic, it's also about, if you think about it, more of a way of celebrating life through preparing for the end, because at the end is inevitable.
Completely, 100%. The only certainty that we have in life is that we will one day pass away. And I think life is beautiful, and I think what people accumulate and what people do in their lives is something that we can pass off to a younger generation. And there's no better way to do that than with a will. And it is their statistics where 75% of South Africans don't have a will, and 90% of South Africans pass away and cannot pay for all the unexpected costs that arise at death. And I think it's quite interesting, especially in South Africa, because I grew up in South Africa. I've spent the majority of my adult years overseas, but coming back to South Africa with a different, fresher outlook on things, it's also made me look at, what we're actually learning when we're in school, what we're learning when we're in university. And, I think me joining Capital Legacy has really educated me just as an individual in terms of, what is an executor? What are conveyancing fees? All of these fees that arise that, to be quite honest with you, Tasneem, I had no idea even existed. And if that's me, someone who's working for a corporate company, who's been educated, what about the rest of South Africans? It's a very, very common topic, especially at the moment, because September is Wills Month. So it's very, so this is actually our Wills Month nationally. So a lot of financial advisors, lawyers, and banks are running campaigns to draft people's wills at no cost. But this is something that we do all year round. So we have Wills Month 12 months out of the year.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you've kind of gone into what my first question was, which was, why is it so important to have a will? And you mentioned, obviously, there's a lot of costs that come after a person has passed on. So
100%.
Can you talk through some of those costs, not necessarily the living costs of, the things that are left behind for the person to pay. But just in terms of wrapping up an estate, because that's what it's termed, right? When you pass away, your estate has to be wound up, or whatever the term
100%.
is. So can you talk a bit about that, the process of winding up an estate? What are some of the costs associated with that, and how can having a will almost, or a course of action of how your will must be executed kind of mitigate against some of those expenses?
That's a fantastic question. So really, in essence, it comes down to clients that have a will and clients that don't have a will. And when I'm talking about clients, I'm talking about, everyone in South Africa. And, we all fall under the same jurisdiction, whether you do or don't have a will. And when someone passes away without a will, we call it interstate succession, which basically means that all of your assets, everything that you've accumulated in your lifetime will then, there has to be an executor, and it will be going to the master's office. But if a client does not have a will, it's very, their estate is dealt with very, very strict laws and regulations, in terms of who inherits. It could be a lengthy process because they're looking for an executor. So it gives us quite a few issues. And it's also, Tasneem, it's very sad because a lot of the times, in some cultures in South Africa, people think that as soon as they have a will, they've signed their death notice. Yeah. And that is definitely not the course that we want people to take. We want people to be socially responsible, to look at their life, this is what I've accumulated just by having a simple piece of paper witnessed by two people and having your signature can completely, move away from interstate succession and the rigid laws that it falls under, as opposed to a client that does have a will. It's much easier for the master of the High Court to then decide, who gets a piece of the pie in essence. And, that's your decision, But Tasneem, it really, when we speak about the costs of death, I always refer to them as the big four, not the big five, but I talk about them with the big four. It's the main one is your executor's fee. Now, when a client passes away, there actually is an executor that needs to be nominated. And that executor takes about 4.025% of the estate. Now, that is the bank standard. So when you've got your will with a bank or with an attorney, it's generally around a 4%. But it gets really interesting. So the executor takes his 4% out of your estate, as he basically takes the role of the deceased in terms of paying out the beneficiaries, as well as paying off debt that the deceased has accumulated. But where it gets really interesting is any income generated into an estate late account. So if the deceased had property that he was renting or investments that were accumulating interest every month, all of that money entering an estate late is charged at 6%. Now that leaves us with quite a big problem, because if an executor who has no personal connection to a family is capitalizing 6% off an additional income every month, is there really a need to wrap up that estate? Is there urgency to wrap it up? There isn't. No, because they are earning quite substantially from it. So, in terms of from a capital legacy point of view, the CEO of our company, Alex, was a financial advisor himself, and he decided he didn't want his clients' estates to have executors dip their hands into his clients' estates for doing a very simple job. And that's when we decided at Capital Legacy, we're going to charge 0% for an executor's fee. Nothing. Wow. Sure. And therefore there is no timeline when we're wrapping up an estate, because it's done so quickly, as opposed to a bank that takes anywhere from 2 to 4 years to wrap up an estate. Sure, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So there's quite a lot that you said there that my brain was like flashing like
sorry, I'm sorry. So
no. Just because it's like things that I think like I didn't know, even though, I mean, my husband and I have been through the process of the wills and that, but there's so much, because it's not our responsibility to necessarily know like the ins and out legal things, but there's so many things that we should also just be aware of. So first of all, I was going to ask you, what is an executor? Because I always hear this, and you did explain it really well, where you said it's that person almost represents the deceased and it takes the place of the deceased, who then
100%
dishes out the thing, right? But I also, my experience with what you've said now is knowing people personally who have gone through this process. And like a story I can share is a woman whose husband passed away suddenly, and they didn't have a will, I think, and also, but it was with the bank, or I don't know what the story was, but because they were taking so long to wrap up the estate, in the meantime, she had to sell the house and they had to move the kids because the house was all part of it, and it was such a mess. So you hear these horror stories of this happening, and obviously not in all cases, but in a large majority of cases, the women are the one who are more severely affected, especially traditionally, most times a lot of the estate is in the man's name, like if you have a traditional situation of the husband being the breadwinner. But there's also a lot of other factors that come into play, such as whether you are married in or out of community of property, that kind of thing. So can you just briefly touch on that? Like, how does having or not having a will impact on different types of marital kind of structures?
100%. So, I just wanted to go back to what you said earlier in terms of, it usually happens to the woman where she's kicked out of her house or has to pay exuberant fees just to wind up her husband's death. And, it's a really interesting topic. So life insurance is a lot cheaper for women as it is for men. And it's not on the basis that it's men and women. It's on the basis that men generally live for a shorter period of time as opposed to females. We do live for a much longer period, and it is inevitable that that situation will occur. So I stress all women, especially married women, to make sure that their partners and husbands do have a will. In saying that, marital regimes do affect the will, and when it comes to paying out beneficiaries. For example, if two people are married in community of property, that automatically attracts estate duty and all of those other costs that come in, as well as we strongly recommend, we actually don't do joint wills at Capital Legacy. We always recommend that each person have their own will. It just is a lot easier when it comes to estate administration, as opposed to someone who's married with accrual, with an ANC with accrual. There isn't really a massive difference in terms of the cost of death and winding up an estate to someone who's married with an anti-nuptial agreement, with accrual, without accrual. But there really is quite a significant difference when someone is married in community of property, as they will always have to be paying conveyancing fees when that person passes on. That debt could be carried over to the spouse. So there are definitely pros and cons of each, but at the end of the day, we just get back down to what we need to do, and that's a will.
So staying on the topic, on the issue of men versus women, it kind of segues into what I want to ask next, because obviously this channel is about private practice owners, health professionals who start private practices. And obviously across the spectrum, there are many males and females, but in the we're not called allieds anymore, but in the health space specifically, like where it's physios, OT, speech therapists, a very big proportion of those private practices are women. So I want to now touch on the difference between having a will for yourself as an individual in your personal capacity for your personal assets, and having some form of succession planning for your business in the event that you pass on. Do you have a will for that, or is that something entirely different?
So it completely ties in, and we can't segment, your personal life as opposed to your corporate life and have two separate wills. It actually all comes down to your own personal will and your decisions. So, I think you also need to have a chat to your financial advisor or a chat to your business partner in that essence. Look at look at the situation and ask, the client needs to ask himself the question, what situation would I like if I were no longer here? So would I want my business partner to continue with my business? Would I want my child would I want let's say my young adult son to form part of that business when he's ready? And all of those, aspirations and visions that you have can actually be described in your will with your last wishes. As well as any debt. If you just opened up a business and there's debt, and it then ties into in community of property, and you marry to someone in community of property, you need to make provisions for that debt. If you were to pass away tomorrow, that debt would fall onto your spouse. You need to take up the right policies to cover yourself that would pay out in the event of an unnatural death, that they can cover all of those shortfalls. And that is stipulated in your will. You can say, when we do your calculation of properties and assets and liabilities, you also have a look at your debt. And, a lot of companies that start up, there would be, some debt that they have to pay back. They've got investors that have invested in the company. They need to take out those life insurance policies correctly to make sure that if they were to pass away, the burden wouldn't fall onto their loved ones. And that can be completely stipulated in your will. It's not one or the other. It's just one will.
So what I'm hearing you say is that your will and your other financial products like life policies and that, they have to go hand in hand. So you have to you can't go and do your will there by the bank, but then you've got your financial advisor just doing you just took out the life policy and they're not talking to each other. Because you brought up an important point is that, some people will say, oh, but why do I need a will? I don't really have assets. I'm poor. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have properties. Why do I need a will? But you're bringing up an important point, which is that when you pass on it's not only your assets, it's also your liabilities that needs to be passed on to someone. Right?
100%. Yeah. So it's really, a lot of people don't know, but when you pass away, we actually have to advertise your death in the national newspaper, as well as the province where you've last been residing for the first 12 months. So that, those are advertising costs, and that, unfortunately there is someone has the job of looking through newspapers to find if someone's passed away that actually owes their money. And, it is a reality, and it's the law. We have to advertise your death in the newspaper, and that doesn't that's not free. Those advertising costs are charged. But with us, we don't charge those advertising costs because we really do take care of our clients. And it was a really interesting point that you brought up in terms of a life insurance policy and your will. So let's say you've got your will at the bank and you've taken out a life insurance policy to cover any debt that you've got in your business. If you've taken money from investors and you have to owe them back that money, and if you pass away, you've got your life insurance policy that can pay out to them. But it's really interesting, Tasneem, because at Capital Legacy, we found there was a little bit of an issue with that. So we would draft your will, we take care of the cost of dying, and then we sit and we wait for life insurance policies to be paid out to us, from other Discovery, Momentum, Old Mutual, Sanlam. We wait. It's a waiting game, and that estate just sits on our table, and we're just waiting for this insurance life product to pay out so that we can give it to the investors and everything. So then we decided, we're not going to wait anymore. Let's create our own life insurance product, so that as soon as the client passes away, we've got the death certificate, we'll start wrapping up the estate. We work in-house. Our life insurance product is part of our will. We can then pay it out to the necessary beneficiaries. So, and we've been running now for 10 years, and we've only launched that MyCover product last year, September. And we've seen it do quite well. And it makes sense to have your will, have your executor, and have your life insurance policy under one roof.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. So I want to also then touch on, when you have a business, then there's also different types of business entities. So if you are a sole prop, then you are your business. So obviously your business then is part of who you are, right? So whereas if you have an Inc. and you are sort of a director in the Inc., then the business is a separate entity. So it doesn't then form part of your assets, but what your stake in that business is part of your assets. Can you then explain what would be the difference in your succession planning for your practice, your business specifically? Like, what do you then need to do differently between like a sole proper and a partnership and stuff versus a company or a PTY or an Inc. or
100%. So at the end of the day, you just need to know what your value is, what your stake is, what's your, if you look at your company as a pie, what's your piece of the pie? What is the value of it? And, once you've found out that value, do you owe any debt on your value in the company? So if you were, I'll use your example as a director, you have quite a substantial, directors of companies that have quite a substantial share of that, so let's just use an example. Someone is a director, they've got shares in a company at the value of, let's say, 10 million rand. When that director passes away, those shares, will be sold to other shareholders, and the proceeds of that will then go to the family, as stipulated in your will. Without having a will, the shareholders could take your shares for free, for example, and the family be left with nothing. So,
oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why, and I think, I hope a lot of directors, do have a will, and that, when they share, so the executor would then be able to have, legalities over those shares, because it's stipulated in the will. They can't just disappear. They need to be somewhere. Were they sold? Were they auctioned off? The proceeds of that need to come to my beneficiaries as stipulated here in his will. So there are a lot of pros to having a will as a business owner. But I think at the end of the day, the business owner needs to ask himself two questions. He needs to ask himself, what's my piece of the pie? And what do I want to happen if I'm no longer here? Two very hard questions, but it is the reality of our life. Yeah.
So, I mean, like what I'm hearing you say is obviously with a sole proprietor, then if you are the only owner and no employees, whatever, the business would have to be closed, and then that's how it's wound up, right? But if you are owner, if you have a registered company, if you are the only director, then I suppose it's fine, because you are the only director and you have 100% shares, and then however that shares or whatever happens with the business, that will have to then close. But there are practices who have multiple directors. And what you are saying is that if you don't have a personal will that stipulates what must happen with your shares in a company, then essentially the other directors can stake claim to those shares, because you didn't say that those shares must be part of given to your family. It belongs to the company then. It defaults to the company, which is such an important thing. And I mean, I think, like I said before, a lot of practice owners will be like, well, we don't exactly run multi-million-dollar businesses, we held practices, but it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is you want to make sure that what's yours stays with your family, and not or the people you want to elect. I mean, if you want to give the shares to the company, then power to you, but
by
you
all means,
want to make sure that it is from what your wishes are. So yeah,
I agree.
So
and it's also really interesting. So if it was a sole owner, right, just one person in a company, maybe it's a physiotherapist and it's just her. She's got a lady who does all of her bookings. So it's two people in the business. She needs to, think about her succession planning as a private practice owner. If she were to pass away, would she want the executor to sell her practice? And it's even if she's just she's the only one, it's her company. She's the only technical employee she works for herself. She needs to communicate that in her will. So she could say, it is my last dying wish that my company be sold and all proceeds go to my beneficiaries as nominated in my will. Otherwise it leaves us in because I mean, she's got those clients. Sorry, my lights just came on. She's got
load shedding.
Load shedding. She's got a wealth of clients. Maybe she's got 300 clients that she sees for physiotherapy, and there's another physiotherapist that would like to start their own business. Maybe they've just moved to South Africa and they see that this business is for sale. They can buy it and proceeds go to beneficiaries. So far better situation to have that happen to your family as opposed to just losing it. forever.
Yeah. But there's another issue that you've touched on, which is maybe not for this particular interview, which is around succession planning of your actual practice, because we are, like with lawyers and people in the financial sector, we are highly regulated. So there are certain things that we can and cannot do. So, for example, I can't say that my husband must inherit my practice and continue with it. He would have to sell it because he's not an occupational therapist. And only another HPCS over an OT practice and own that practice. So you have to then take that into consideration, because the people who wind up your estate might not necessarily be aware of those things. And then there are also other things you need because you have patients, right? So if you have active patients, there are so many rules and regulations around record keeping and the length of time you keep your records and all of that stuff. So you need to have in place some kind of a plan. So what's going to happen with your records, with your patient records? Do you have a system that is going to store them until your estate is wrapped up? Who's going to keep those files? What if the patient wants to transfer? All of that. Because I remember 100%. When I had my fourth pregnancy, yes, I have 4 children.
Wow.
And it was unexpected. And I found out while I was in Cape Town. And when I came back to Joburg, because I couldn't get hold of my gynae's office. And then I went there and I saw his office was empty. And I was like, what happened to the gynae? And I just went into the gynae next door. And she said, oh, he died suddenly of, nobody knew he had cancer. But she said, but we have all his files. So he had obviously had some succession plan that who must his files be sent to, so that his patients wouldn't be left in the lurch. I could now go to that gynae and either get my file from her to go to someone else, or I then carried on with her because she was right next door. But that's an example of, as a health professional, what your duty is also to your patients, to have a succession plan in place with what's going to happen to all this highly confidential legal documents. And then there's also other things, like if you have like passwords in the cloud, if you have an online booking system, all of those things, how are those, who's going to get, how does people get access to that so that they can actually wrap up your estate and all of those things?
It's very interesting. I really think, because I really think talking about medical records, because it's very personal, and to actually dispense those records to someone who's not, where the client has not agreed or signed consent, it could be POPI infringement.
Yeah, exactly.
POPI Act.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I would always recommend, if I was speaking to a client and he were a doctor, I'd say you need to create a safety deposit box so that your assistant is aware that if in the event that you pass away, there would be a safety deposit box, and it would go into it with a lock, and all of your clients would be stipulated on the top of the box with contact details. It is then, the client can then have a choice. They receive an email or a phone call from the assistant to inform them that their gynecologist has passed away. Would they like us to refer a new gynecologist and then pass your records on? At that point, the client can then say yes or no, opt in or opt out. But I think that that's a really, really interesting topic in terms of succession planning in a medical field, because, it happens and it's really important.
Yeah. So I definitely want to get somebody. If you know anybody, please send them my way. They can go into length about that. I mean, it's the same for lawyers, right? I mean, lawyers probably also have that same kind of confidential data and all of that stuff. So I definitely would like to unpack that a little bit more. But I think in terms of the wills, thank you so much. I think it's been really enlightening. I mean, everybody knows they need one, but sometimes you just need to hear like in more depth, like what happens if you don't, to kind of drive the point home. So if we can just end off with you maybe explaining, like, if there's anybody that's listening who's like, it's really driven home for them and they're like, oh crap, I really need to get my butt into gear and get this thing going. What can Capital Legacy do for them? Like, how do they contact you? How do they go about it? What's the process?
So the process is very simple. All that you need to do is you can contact me, you can send me an SMS, email, or you can give me a call. I think, Tasneem will just put my number in my bio with all the details there. And all that I need from you as a client is just the area in which you stay. So if you're in Joburg or Durban or Cape Town, if you could please just tell me that you're interested in getting your last will and testament drafted. And all I need from you is your name, your cell phone number, and your email address. And it's a very simple process. The entire process is free. which is fantastic.
Wow.
So there's
Okay,
no
that's
charge.
amazing.
Yeah, there's no charge to the process at all. We can draft your will for free at no cost. And then the consultation is also free. So wherever you are in the country, we've got nationwide testamentary consultants that will go out to you. They are will specialists.
Okay.
And our consultant will go to you, draft your will for you. And then he will also do a calculation of the costs of dying. And I always, I love going with
Never thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love going with the consultants to their appointments, especially if it's one of my VIP clients I usually attend. And it's really it's super educational. It's a little bit sad, but it's very educational. And I truly believe that education is key. And if the more education you have, the more knowledge you have, the more empowered you are to make the right decisions. So he will do a full calculation of the costs of death based off of your estate. So it's not a one size fits all. It's based off of what you have. And then we will offer you that optional solution for a premium of anything from 135 Rand to make sure that we take care of all of the costs of dying. We cover all of those crazy fees. We pay out, your beneficiaries in a very short timeline, as well as provide liquidity, so money to your family while we are wrapping up your estate to make sure that they don't go hungry, that they don't have to become homeless. We make sure that their life is maintained while we are in the back wrapping up the estate. And by the end of the process, the beneficiaries have been paid out. If the client doesn't want that optional solution, it's not a problem at all. We will still draft your will for you at no cost. The client usually receives their will in about 48 hours after their consultation. It's emailed to them. It is password protected, so you just have to put your ID number in to access the will, print it, and as soon as it's printed, we send a courier service to your house to collect your will and bring back and put it in our safe, in our vault.
That sounds amazing. And also, I just want to also mention, I know that obviously as Muslim, and I met you through Naz, that I know what I love also about Capital Legacy is that I know that you also have Sharia specialists, because like you mentioned before, even though if you married a community of property or not, we have such a multicultural country, and there's different religious rules and laws and cultural laws that one has to also abide by within the secular legal system. So it's 100%. Great that you guys have that.
Yeah, so we've got that Sharia compliant will. We're the only company in the world that does Sharia compliant wills, and we've also got a full Sharia compliant life policy. And it's supported by our local muftis in the area, and we've seen huge success with that. And especially in the Muslim communities, I think for women it can be quite hard, and I think it's always something that's at the back of your mind. I'm not Muslim myself, but my partner, I always think if he were to pass away, I would be in a lot of trouble, because we're both breadwinners into our family. And I think just for all women, it's always something that's at the back of your mind, and just a simple signature on a piece of paper can give you that reassurance. So I feel very proud that we do have those Sharia compliant wills, and we've seen great success with that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Holly. And as you said,
thank you.
I will put all the links and phone numbers and contact details and everything in the description box below. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can get all that information there. Thank you to you, and thank you for Capital Legacy.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.